The wise and the simple in heaven. It is believed that in heaven the wise will have more glory and eminence than the simple, because it is said in Daniel, "They that are intelligent shall shine as with the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars for ever and ever." But few know who are meant by the intelligent, and by those that turn many to righteousness. The common belief is that they are such as are called the accomplished and learned, especially such as have taught in the church and have surpassed others in acquirements and in preaching, and still more such among them as have converted many to the faith. In the world all such are regarded as the intelligent, nevertheless such are not the intelligent in heaven that are spoken of in these words, unless their intelligence is heavenly intelligence. What this is, will now be told. Heavenly intelligence is interior intelligence, arising from a love for truth, not with any glory in the world nor any glory in heaven as an end, but with the truth itself as an end, by which they are in mostly affected and with which they are in mostly delighted. Those who are affected by and delighted with the truth itself are affected by and delighted with the light of heaven, and those who are affected by and delighted with the light of heaven are also affected by and delighted with divine truth, and indeed with the Lord himself, for the light of heaven is divine truth, and divine truth is the Lord in heaven. This light enters only into the interiors of the mind, for the interiors of the mind are formed for the reception of that light, and are affected by and delighted with that light as it enters, for whatever flows in and is received from heaven has in it what is delightful and pleasant. From this comes a genuine affection for truth, which is an affection for truth's sake. Those who are in this affection, or what is the same thing, in this love, are in heavenly intelligence, and shine in heaven as with the brightness of the firmament. They so shine because divine truth, wherever it is in heaven, is what gives light, and the firmament of heaven signifies from correspondence the intellectual faculty, both with angels and men, that is in the light of heaven. But those that love the truth, either with glory in the world or glory in heaven as an end, cannot shine in heaven, since they are delighted with and affected by the light of the world, and not with the very light of heaven, and the light of the world without the light of heaven is in heaven mere thick darkness. For the glory of self is what rules, because it is the end in view, and when that glory is the end, man puts himself in the first place, and such truths as can be made serviceable to his glory, he looks upon simply as means to the end and as instruments of service. For he that loves divine truths, for the sake of his own glory, regards himself and not the Lord in divine truths, thereby turning the sight pertaining to his understanding and faith away from heaven to the world, and away from the Lord to himself. Such, therefore, are in the light of the world and not in the light of heaven. In outward form, or in the sight of men, they appear just as intelligent and learned as those who are in the light of heaven, because they speak in a like manner, and sometimes to outward appearance they even appear wiser, because they are moved by love of self, and are skilled in counterfeiting heavenly affections, but in their inward form, in which they appear before the angels, they are wholly different. All this shows in some degree who those are, that are meant by the intelligent that will shine in heaven as with the brightness of the firmament. Who are meant by those that turn many to righteousness, who will shine as the stars, shall now be told. By those who turn many to righteousness, are meant those who are wise, and in heaven those are called wise who are in good, and those are in good that apply divine truths at once to the life, for as soon as divine truth comes to be of the life it becomes good, since it comes to be of will and love, and whatever is of will and love is called good, therefore such are called wise, because wisdom is of the life. But those that do not commit divine truths at once to the life, but first to the memory, from which they afterwards draw them and apply them to the life, are called the intelligent. What and how great the difference is, between the wise and the intelligent, in the heavens, can be seen in the chapter that treats of the two kingdoms of heaven, the celestial and the spiritual, and in the chapter that treats of the three heavens. Those who are in the Lord's celestial kingdom, and consequently in the third or inmost heaven, are called the righteous, because they attribute all righteousness to the Lord and none to themselves. The Lord's righteousness in heaven is the good that is from the Lord. Such then, are here meant by those that turn to righteousness, and such are meant also in the Lord's words, "The righteous shall shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father." Such shine forth as the sun, because they are in love to the Lord from the Lord, and that love is meant by the sun. The light of such is flame-colored, and the ideas of their thought are so tinged with what is flaming, because they receive the good of love directly from the Lord as the sun in heaven. All who have acquired intelligence and wisdom in the world, are received in heaven and become angels, each in accordance with the quality and degree of his intelligence and wisdom. For whatever a man acquires in the world abides, and he takes it with him after death, and it is further increased and filled out, but within and not beyond the degree of his affection and desire for truth and its good, those with but little affection and desire receiving but little, and yet as much as they are capable of receiving within that degree, while those with much affection and desire receive much. The degree itself of affection and desire is like a measure that is filled to the full, he that has a large measure receiving more, and he that has a small measure receiving less. This is so because man's love, to which affection and desire belong, receives all that accords with itself, consequently reception is measured by the love. This is what is meant by the Lord's words, to him that hath it shall be given, that he may have more abundantly. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall be given into your bosom. All are received into heaven who have loved truth and good for the sake of truth and good, therefore, those that have loved much are called the wise, and those that have loved little are called the simple. The wise in heaven are in much light, the simple in less light, everyone in accordance with the degree of his love for good and truth. To love truth and good for the sake of truth and good is to will and do them, for those love who will and do, while those who do not will and do not love. Such also love the Lord and are loved by the Lord, because good and truth are from the Lord. And inasmuch as good and truth are from the Lord is in good and truth, and he is in those who receive good and truth in their life by willing and doing. Moreover, when man is viewed in himself he is nothing but his own good and truth, because good is of his will and truth of his understanding, and man is such as his will and understanding are. Evidently then, man is loved by the Lord just to the extent that his will is formed from good and his understanding from truth. Also to be loved by the Lord is to love the Lord, since love is reciprocal, for, upon him who is loved, the Lord bestows ability to love. It is believed in the world, that those who have much knowledge, whether it be knowledge of the teachings of the Church and the Word, or of the sciences, have a more interior and keen vision of truth than others, that is, are more intelligent and wise, and such have this opinion of themselves. But what true intelligence and wisdom are, and what spurious and false intelligence and wisdom are, shall be told in what now follows. True intelligence and wisdom is seeing and perceiving what is true and good, and thereby what is false and evil, and clearly distinguishing between them, and this from an interior intuition and perception. With every man there are interior faculties and exterior faculties, interior faculties belonging to the internal or spiritual man, and exterior faculties belonging to the exterior or natural man. Accordingly, as man's interiors are formed and made one with his exteriors, man sees and perceives. His interiors can be formed only in heaven, his exteriors are formed in the world. When his interiors have been formed in heaven, the things they contain flow into his exteriors, which are from the world, and so form them that they correspond with, that is, act as one with, his interiors, and when this is done, man sees and perceives from what is interior. The interiors can be formed only in one way, namely, by man's looking to the divine and to heaven, since, as has been said, the interiors are formed in heaven, and man looks to the divine when he believes in the divine, and believes that all truth and good, and consequently all intelligence and wisdom, are from the divine, and man believes in the divine when he is willing to be led by the divine. In this way, and none other, are the interiors of man opened. The man who is in that belief, and in a life that is in accordance with his belief, has the ability and capacity to understand and be wise, but to become intelligent and wise he must learn many things, both things pertaining to heaven and things pertaining to the world, things pertaining to heaven from the Word and from the Church, and things pertaining to the world from the sciences. To the extent that man learns and applies to life, he becomes intelligent and wise, for to that extent, the interior sight belonging to his understanding and the interior affection belonging to his will are perfected. The simple of this class are those whose interiors have been opened, but not so enriched by spiritual, moral, civil and natural truths. Such perceive truths when they hear them, but do not see them in themselves. But the wise of this class are those whose interiors have been both opened and enriched. Such both see truths inwardly and perceive them. All this makes clear what true intelligence is and what true wisdom is. Spurious intelligence and wisdom is failing to see and perceive from within what is true and what is good, and thereby what is false and what is evil, but merely believing that to be true and good, and that to be false and evil, which is said by others to be so, and then confirming it. Because such see truth from someone else, and not from the truth itself, they can seize upon and believe what is false as readily as what is true, and can confirm it until it appears true, for whatever is confirmed puts on the appearance of truth, and there is nothing that cannot be confirmed. The interiors of such are opened only from beneath, but their exteriors are open to the extent that they have confirmed themselves. For this reason, the light from which they see is not the light of heaven, but the light of the world, which is called natural light, lumen, and, in that light, falsities can shine like truths, and when confirmed they can even appear resplendent, but not in the light of heaven. Of this class those are less intelligent and wise who have strongly confirmed themselves, and those are more intelligent and wise who have less strongly confirmed themselves. All this shows what spurious intelligence and wisdom are. But those are not included in this class who, in childhood, supposed what they heard from their masters to be true, if in a riper age, when they think from their own understanding, they do not continue to hold fast to it, but long for truth, and from that longing seek for it, and when they find it are interiorly moved by it. Because such are moved by the truth for the truth's sake, they see the truth before they confirm it. This may be illustrated by an example. There was a discussion among spirits, why animals are born into all the knowledge suited to their nature, but man is not, and the reason was said to be that animals are in the order of their life, and man is not, consequently man must needs be led into order by means of what he learns of internal and external things. But if man were born into the order of his life, which is to love God above all things, and his neighbor as himself, he would be born into intelligence and wisdom, and as knowledges are acquired would come into a belief in all truth. Good spirits saw this at once and perceived it to be true, and this merely from the light of truth, while the spirits who had confirmed themselves in faith alone, and had thereby set aside love and charity, were unable to understand it, because the light of falsity, which they had confirmed, had made obscure to them the light of truth. False intelligence and wisdom is all intelligence and wisdom that is separated from the acknowledgement of the divine, for all such as do not acknowledge the divine, but acknowledge nature in the place of the divine, think from the bodily sensual, and are merely sensual, however highly they may be esteemed in the world for their accomplishments and learning. For their learning does not ascend beyond such things as appear before their eyes in the world, these they hold in the memory and look at them in an almost material way, although the same knowledges serve the truly intelligent in forming their understanding. By sciences, the various kinds of experimental knowledge are meant, such as physics, astronomy, chemistry, mechanics, geometry, anatomy, psychology, philosophy, the history of kingdoms and of the literary world, criticism, and languages. The clergy who deny the divine do not raise their thoughts above the sensual things of the external man, and regard the things of the word in the same way as others regard the sciences, not making them matters of thought or of any intuition by an enlightened rational mind, and for the reason that their interiors are closed up, together with those exteriors that are nearest to their interiors. These are closed up because they have turned themselves away from heaven, and have retroverted those faculties that were capable of looking heavenward, which are, as has been said above, the interiors of the human mind. For this reason they are incapable of seeing anything true or good, this being to them in thick darkness, while whatever is false and evil is in light. And yet sensual men can reason, some of them more cunningly and keenly than anyone else, but they reason from the fallacies of the senses confirmed by their knowledges, and because they are able to reason in this way, they believe themselves to be wiser than others. The fire that kindles with affection their reasonings is the fire of the love of self and the world. Such are those who are in false intelligence and wisdom, and who are meant by the Lord in Matthew, seeing they see not, and hearing they hear not, neither do they understand. And again, these things are hid from the intelligent and wise, and revealed unto babes. It has been granted me to speak with many of the learned after their departure from the world, with some of distinguished reputation and celebrated in the literary world for their writings, and with some not so celebrated, although endowed with profound wisdom. Those that in heart had denied the divine, whatever their professions may have been, had become so stupid as to have little comprehension even of anything truly civil, still less of anything spiritual. I perceived, and also saw, that the interiors of their minds were so closed up as to appear black, for in the spiritual world such things become visible, and in consequence they were unable to endure any heavenly light or admit any influx from heaven. This blackness which their interiors presented was more intense and extended with those that had confirmed themselves against the divine, by the knowledges they had acquired. In the other life such accept all falsity with delight, imbibing it as a sponge does water, and they repel all truth as an elastic bony substance repels what falls upon it. In fact, it is said that the interiors of those that have confirmed themselves against the divine, and in favor of nature, become bony, and their heads down to the nose appear callous like ebony, which is a sign that they no longer have any perception. Those of this description are immersed in quagmires that appear like bogs, and there they are harassed by the fantasies into which their falsities are turned. Their infernal fire is a lust for glory and reputation, which prompts them to assail one another, and from an infernal ardor to torment those about them who do not worship them as deities, and this they do, one to another, in turns. Into such things is all the learning of the world changed, that has not received into itself light from heaven through acknowledgement of the divine. That these are such in the spiritual world, when they come into it after death, may be inferred from this alone, that all things that are in the natural memory and are in immediate conjunction with the things of bodily sense, which is true of such knowledges as are mentioned above, then become quiescent, and only such rational principles as are drawn from these then serve for thought and speech. For man carries with him his entire natural memory, but its contents are not then under his view, and do not come into his thought as when he lived in the world. He can take nothing from that memory and bring it forth into spiritual light, because its contents are not objects of that light. But those things of the reason and understanding that man has acquired, from knowledges while living in the body, are in accord with the light of the spiritual world. Consequently, so far as the spirit of man has been made rational in the world through knowledge and science, it is to the same extent rational after being loosed from the body, for man is then a spirit, and it is the spirit that thinks in the body. But in respect to those that have acquired intelligence and wisdom through knowledge and science, who are such as have applied all things to the use of life, and have also acknowledged the divine, loved the word, and lived a spiritual moral life, to such, the sciences have served as a means of becoming wise, and also of corroborating the things pertaining to faith. The interiors of the mind of such have been perceived by me, and were seen as transparent from light of a glistening white, flamy, or blue color, like that of translucent diamonds, rubies, and sapphires, and this in accordance with confirmations in favor of the divine and divine truths drawn from science. Such is the appearance of true intelligence and wisdom when they are presented to view in the spiritual world. This appearance is derived from the light of heaven, and that light is divine truth going forth from the Lord, which is the source of all intelligence and wisdom. The planes of that light, in which variegations like those of colors exist, are the interiors of the mind, and these variegations are produced by confirmations of divine truths by means of such things as are in nature, that is, in the sciences. For the interior mind of man looks into the things of the natural memory, and the things there that will serve as proofs, it sublimates, as it were, by the fire of heavenly love, and withdraws and purifies them even into spiritual ideas. This is unknown to man as long as he lives in the body, because there he thinks both spiritually and naturally, and he has no perception of the things he then thinks spiritually, but only of those he thinks naturally. But when he has come into the spiritual world, he has no perception of what he thought naturally in the world, but only of what he thought spiritually. Thus is his state changed. All this makes clear, that it is by means of knowledges and sciences that man is made spiritual, also that these are the means of becoming wise, but only with those who have acknowledged the divine in faith and life. Such also before others are accepted in heaven, and are among those there who are at the center, because they are in light more than others. These are the intelligent and wise in heaven, who shine as with the brightness of the firmament, and who shine as the stars, while the simple there are those that have acknowledged the divine, have loved the word, and have lived a spiritual and moral life, but the interiors of their minds have not been so enriched by knowledges and sciences. The human mind is like soil, which is such as it is, made by cultivation. The rich and the poor in heaven. There are various opinions about reception into heaven. Some are of the opinion that the poor are received and the rich are not, some that the rich and the poor are equally received, some that the rich can be received only by giving up their wealth and becoming like the poor, and proofs are found in the word for all of these opinions. But those who make a distinction in regard to heaven between the rich and the poor do not understand the word. In its interiors, the word is spiritual, but in the letter it is natural. Consequently, those who understand the word only in accordance with its literal sense, and not according to any spiritual sense, in many respects, especially about the rich and the poor. For example, that it is as difficult for the rich to enter into heaven as for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle, and that it is easy for the poor because they are poor, since it is said, "Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of the heavens." But those who know anything of the spiritual sense of the word think otherwise. They know that heaven is for all who live a life of faith and love, whether rich or poor. But who are meant in the word by the rich, and who by the poor, will be told in what follows. From much conversation and interaction with angels, it has been granted me to know with certainty that the rich enter heaven just as easily as the poor, and that no man is shut out of heaven on account of his wealth, or received into heaven on account of his poverty. Both the rich and the poor are in heaven, and many of the rich in greater glory and happiness than the poor. It should be said to begin with, that a man may acquire riches and accumulate wealth as far as opportunity is given, if it is not done by craft or fraud, that he may enjoy the delicacies of food and drink, if he does not place his life therein, that he may have a palatial dwelling in accord with his condition, have interaction with others in like condition, frequent places of amusement, talk about the affairs of the world. and need not go about like a devotee with a sad and sorrowful countenance and drooping head, but may be joyful and cheerful. Nor need he give his goods to the poor, except so far as affection leads him. In a word, he may live outwardly precisely like a man of the world, and all this will be no obstacle to his entering heaven, provided that inwardly in himself, he thinks about God as he ought, and acts sincerely and justly in respect to his neighbor. For a man is such as his affection and thought are, or such as his love and faith are, and from these all his outward acts derive their life, since acting is willing, and speaking is thinking, acting being from the will, and speaking from the thought. So where it is said in the word that man will be judged according to his deeds, and will be rewarded according to his works, it is meant that he will be judged and rewarded in accordance with his thought and affection, which are the source of his deeds, or which are in his deeds, for deeds are nothing apart from these, and are precisely such as these are. All this shows that the man's external accomplishes nothing, but only his internal, which is the source of the external. For example, if a man acts honestly and refrains from fraud solely because he fears the laws, and the loss of reputation and thereby of honor or gain, and if that fear did not restrain him would defraud others whenever he could, although such a man's deeds outwardly appear honest, his thought and will are fraud, and because he is inwardly dishonest and fraudulent he has hell in himself. But he who acts honestly and refrains from fraud, because it is against God and against the neighbor, would have no wish to defraud another if he could, his thought and will are conscience, and he has heaven in himself. The deeds of these two appear alike in outward form, but inwardly they are wholly unlike. Since a man can live outwardly as others do, can grow rich, keep a plentiful table, dwell in an elegant house and wear fine clothing according to his condition and function, can enjoy delights and gratifications, and engage in worldly affairs for the sake of his occupation and business and for the life both of the mind and body, provided he inwardly acknowledges the divine and wishes well to the neighbor, it is evident that to enter upon the way to heaven is not so difficult as many believe. The sole difficulty lies in being able to resist the love of self and the world, and to prevent their becoming dominant, for this is the source of all evils. That this is not so difficult as is believed, is meant by these words of the Lord, "Learn of me, for I am meek and lowly of heart, and ye shall find rest to your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." The Lord's yoke is easy and his burden light, because a man is led by the Lord and not by self, just to the extent that he resists the evils that flow forth from love of self and of the world, and because the Lord then resists these evils in man and removes them. I have spoken with some after death who, while they lived in the world, renounced the world and gave themselves up to an almost solitary life, in order that by an abstraction of the thoughts from worldly things they might have opportunity for pious meditations, believing that thus they might enter the way to heaven. But these in the other life are of a sad disposition, they despise others who are not like themselves, they are indignant that they do not have a happier lot than others, believing that they have merited it, they have no interest in others, and turn away from the duties of charity by which there is conjunction with heaven. They desire heaven more than others, but when they are taken up among the angels they induce anxieties that disturb the happiness of the angels, and in consequence they are sent away, and when sent away they betake themselves to desert places, where they lead a life, like that which they lived in the world. Man can be formed for heaven only by means of the world. In the world are the outmost effects in which everyone's affection must be terminated, for unless affection puts itself forth or flows out into acts, which is done in association with others, it is suffocated to such a degree finally that man has no longer any regard for the neighbor, but only for himself. All this makes clear that a life of charity towards the neighbor, which is doing what is just and right in every work and in every employment, is what leads to heaven, and not a life of piety apart from charity, and from this it follows, that only to the extent that man is engaged in the employments of life, can charity be exercised and the life of charity grow, and this is impossible to the extent that man separates himself from those employments. On this subject I will speak now from experience. Of those who while in the world were employed in trade and commerce, and became rich through these pursuits, there are many in heaven, but not so many of those who were in stations of honor and became rich through those employments. And for the reason that these latter, by the gains and honors that resulted from their dispensing justice and equity, and also by the lucrative and honorable positions bestowed on them, were led into loving themselves and the world, and thereby separating their thoughts and affections from heaven and turning them to themselves. For to the extent that a man loves self and the world, and looks to self and the world in everything, he alienates himself from the divine, and separates himself from heaven. As to the lot of the rich in heaven, they live more splendidly than others. Some of them dwell in palaces within which everything is resplendent as if with gold and silver. They have an abundance of all things for the uses of life, but they do not in the least set their heart on these things, but only on uses. Uses are clearly seen as if they were in light, but the gold and silver are seen obscurely, and comparatively as if in shade. This is because while they were in the world they loved uses, and loved gold and silver only as means and instruments. It is the uses that are thus resplendent in heaven, the good of use like gold and the truth of use like silver. Therefore their wealth in heaven is such as their uses were in the world, and such, too, are their delight and happiness. Good uses are providing oneself and one's own with the necessaries of life, also desiring wealth for the sake of one's country and for the sake of one's neighbor, whom a rich man can in many ways benefit more than a poor man. These are good uses because one is able thereby to withdraw his mind from an indolent life which is harmful, since in such a life man's thoughts run to evil because of the evil inherent in him. These uses are good to the extent that they have the divine in them, that is, to the extent that man looks to the divine and to heaven, and finds his good in these, and sees in wealth only a subservient good. But the lot of the rich that have not believed in the divine, and have cast out of their minds the things pertaining to heaven and the church, is the opposite of this. Such are in hell, where filth, misery, and want exist, and into these riches that are loved as an end are changed, and not only riches, but also their very uses, which are either a wish to live as they like and indulge in pleasures, and to have opportunity to give the mind more fully and freely to shameful practices, or a wish to rise above others whom they despise. Such riches and such uses, because they have nothing spiritual, but only what is earthly in them, become filthy, for a spiritual purpose in riches and their uses is like a soul in the body, or like the light of heaven in moist ground, and such riches and uses become putrid as a body does without a soul, or as moist ground does without the light of heaven. Such are those that have been led and drawn away from heaven by riches. Every man's ruling affection, or love, remains with him after death, nor is it rooted out to eternity, since a man's spirit is wholly what his love is, and what is unknown. The body of every spirit and angel is the outward form of his love, exactly corresponding to his inward form, which is the form of his disposition and mind. Consequently the quality of his spirit is known from his face, movements, and speech. While a man is living in the world, the quality of the spirit would be known if he had not learned to counterfeit in his face, movements, and speech what is not his own. All this shows that man remains to eternity such as his ruling affection or love is. It has been granted me to talk with some who lived 1700 years ago, and whose lives are well known from writings of that time, and it was found that the same love still rules them as when they were on the earth. This makes clear also that the love of riches, and of uses from riches, remains with everyone to eternity, and that it is exactly the same as the love acquired in the world, yet with the difference that, in the case of those who devoted their riches to good uses, riches are changed in the other world into delights which are in accord with the uses performed. While in the case of those who devoted their riches to evil uses, riches are turned into mere filth, in which they then take the same delight as they did in the world, in their riches devoted to evil uses. Such then take delight in filth, because filthy pleasures and shameful acts, which had been the uses to which they had devoted their riches, and also avarice, which is a love of riches without regard to use, correspond to filth. Spiritual filth is nothing else. The poor come into heaven not on account of their poverty but because of their life. Everyone's life follows him, whether he be rich or poor. There is no peculiar mercy for one in preference to another. He that has lived well is received, while he that has not lived well is rejected. Moreover, poverty leads and draws man away from heaven just as much as wealth does. There are many among the poor who are not content with their lot, who strive after many things, and believe riches to be blessings, and when they do not gain them are much provoked, and harbor ill thoughts about the divine providence. They also envy others the good things they possess, and are as ready as anyone to defraud others whenever they have opportunity, and to indulge in filthy pleasures. But this is not true of the poor who are content with their lot, and are careful and diligent in their work, who love labor better than idleness, and act sincerely and faithfully, and at the same time live a Christian life. I have now and then talked with those belonging to the peasantry and common people, who while living in the world believed in God and did what was just and right in their occupations. Since they had an affection for knowing truth, they inquired about charity and about faith, having heard in this world much about faith and in the other life much about charity. They were therefore told that charity is everything that pertains to life, and faith everything that pertains to doctrine. Consequently, charity is willing and doing what is just and right in every work, and faith is thinking justly and rightly. And faith and charity are conjoined, the same as doctrine and a life in accordance with it, or the same as thought and will. And faith becomes charity when, that which a man thinks justly and rightly, he also wills and does, and then they are not two but one. This they well understood, and rejoiced, saying that in the world they did not understand believing to be anything else but living. All this makes clear that the rich and the poor alike come into heaven, the one as easily as the other. The belief that the poor enter heaven easily and the rich with difficulty comes from not understanding the word where the rich and the poor are mentioned. In the word, those that have an abundance of knowledges of good and truth, thus who are within the church where the word is, are meant in the spiritual sense by the rich, while those who lack these knowledges, and yet desire them, thus who are outside of the church and where there is no word, are meant by the poor. The rich man clothed in purple and fine linen, and cast into hell, means the Jewish nation, which is called rich because it had the word, and had an abundance of knowledges of good and truth therefrom, garments of purple, signifying knowledges of good, and garments of fine linen, knowledges of truth. But the poor man who lay at the rich man's gate and longed to be fed with the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table, and who was carried by angels into heaven, means the nations that have no knowledges of good and truth and yet desired them. Also the rich that were called to a great supper and excused themselves, mean the Jewish nation, and the poor brought in their place, mean the nations outside of the church. By the rich man of whom the Lord says, "It is easier for a camel to go through a needle's eye than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God." The rich in both the natural sense and the spiritual sense are meant. In the natural sense, the rich are those that have an abundance of riches and set their heart upon them, but in the spiritual sense, they are those that have an abundance of knowledges and learning, which are spiritual riches, and who desire by means of these to introduce themselves into the things of heaven and the church from their own intelligence. And because this is contrary to divine order, it is said to be easier for a camel to go through a needle's eye, a camel, signifying in general in the spiritual sense, the knowing faculty and things known, and a needle's eye, signifying spiritual truth. That such is the meaning of a camel and a needle's eye is not at present known, because the knowledge that teaches what is signified in the spiritual sense, by the things said in the literal sense of the word, has not up to this time been disclosed. In every particular of the word, there is a spiritual sense and also a natural sense, for the word was made to consist wholly of correspondences between natural and spiritual things in order that conjunction of heaven with the world, or of angels with men, might thereby be effected, direct conjunction having ceased. This makes clear who in particular are meant in the word by the rich man. That the rich in the word mean, in the spiritual sense, those who are in knowledges of truth and good, and riches, the knowledges themselves, which are spiritual riches, can be seen from various passages. Also that the poor, in the spiritual sense, signify those who do not possess knowledges of good and of truth, and yet desire them. All these passages may be seen explained in accordance with the spiritual sense in the Arcana Celestia.